my channel. So for today's video, I wanted to discuss just many different ways that you can be an artist and have a career as an artist. A lot of people usually get the misconception, usually the older generations, that art is not really a valid career path. But just because I feel like a lot of art careers out there are not as well known, they usually get misunderstood. But today I just want to present different options and career paths that you can take as an artist, and maybe which one would be more appropriate or suitable for you depending on its responsibilities. So specifically in today's video, I will be discussing careers in the art field that are more in the visual arts department, like drawing, illustration, things that you can visually see. There are so many ways to be an artist, but I specifically specialize in animation, cartoons, illustration, that sort of world. And if you are an artist that actually is in one of the career paths that are not related to animation or illustration, and maybe something that's a little bit more different, feel free to share your experience in the comments below so that other people can also gain more awareness of what opportunities are out there. And as a reminder, Oni, Thunder God's Tale is now out on Netflix. This is the first animated project that I have ever worked on as an assistant director, so I would really appreciate it if you checked it out. It is a super wholesome, cute story, but don't be fooled by all the cute characters and stuff, because there's still some level of depth and darkness to it, which you'll have to just figure out what it is when you watch it. So please give it a watch if you are interested in animation, Japanese culture, and just in general supporting artists working in animation. So I'm gonna start off with the first type of job that I myself am currently doing myself, which is storyboarding. As a story artist, you're pretty much bringing a script to what you will eventually be seeing on the screen. A lot of storyboards are often just left in black and white and kept as sketches, so there's low commitment to like the final art of it. If you are someone who often just likes to sketch and you just like to make quick drawings, but you don't like to always spend hours and hours and hours on like one specific drawing, storyboarding might definitely be up your alley. So another common department in animation is character design. So when you're a character designer, you usually focus more on the look and design and the appeal of the characters who will pretty much be the stars of the show. As a character designer, you might focus more on like shapes, proportions, volumes, how details of this character's look might contribute to their personality. You're really focusing on the characters only and not so much on like, ooh, the background. And as a character designer, you might have to work on facial expressions, character rotations, and making sure that no matter what angle this character is facing or what pose they are in the story, they still represent that character and they kind of look the same and stay consistent throughout. The next is visual development, which is similar to character design, which instead of just focusing on the character, you might be focusing more on the overall look of this show and how you're going to make everything look cohesive in one world, one environment, to stay consistent with this one story. Basically, you're kind of defining the look or the style of this show. So a lot of the different looks you'll be developing for certain moments might have to align with how a character is feeling in that moment, or how intense or soft is this moment of the story going to be. Those are just some things to consider, but at the end of the day, everything kind of will fall back to story. Now, bringing it into the CG space, CG modeling is another option for anybody who likes to sculpt or create 3D models of characters or props or worlds, environments. And instead of sculpting it in real life with clay, you're kind of doing it through a program like Maya or Blender, because when you're creating an animated project, you're going to have to create all of the assets that are needed for it, such as the characters, the props, the worlds, vehicles, plants, anything really. So as a CG modeler, you will be developing those assets that will then be passed on to animators to use to bring them to life. And that brings me on to animation, which there is still a lot of 2D opportunities that exist today, but I don't think that there are as many 2D animation opportunities as available as there were in the past. Like, you can probably still find some at Titmouse animation studios or at smaller indie animation studios, or even overseas in Europe or in Asia. But as an animator, whether if you're working in 2D or CG, you're always focusing more on the characters' performance, the acting, and how they're going to be moving throughout a scene. But usually most animated projects will almost always have a need for strong acting and character performance. As an animator, you're usually going to be looking at a storyboard artist's work to use their work as reference and inspiration, but you're going to be the one who's going to be bringing that acting to a whole different level and just pushing it beyond what the boards provided you with. So that really is only the tip of the iceberg for the types of opportunities that are in the world of animation, but I just wanted to provide you guys like the basic top things that I could think of. And you know, as you gain more interest in a certain field, and then maybe you can look more into them and then see more specific types of roles like a prop designer, storyboard revisionist, things like that. So moving on to another industry, just so we can cover more stuff, will be books, illustration, and the world of publishing. So of course, this is the other job that I am most familiar with at the moment, but it is being a comic book artist / graphic novelist, where you are pretty much writing a story and illustrating the whole thing to life. It is extremely similar to storyboarding. Like, I would say they are cousins, because although they are kind of for different industries, they are still requiring very similar skills, where you're going to be laying out different scenes with characters doing certain actions or acting. That's another job very similar to graphic novels and comic books, is just being an author or an illustrator of a book. So let's just first say you're just gonna make a whole picture book. You can write it and illustrate it simultaneously, and it just won't be a graphic novel. It will just be like written text with illustrations alongside it to support it, and this is often used for picture books. But in a way, I would say that being an author of a picture book or a graphic novel is kind of like an in-between of a freelance and full-time job, because you can, in a way, be paid a full-time salary, but the way that you receive those payments will be broken down into milestone payments. So it's not like you get paid weekly like a regular employee. You might just get a huge chunk of a payment for every time you complete a milestone of that project. But I would say that being a picture book author / artist and graphic novel artist is a little bit less stable than being somebody working in the animation industry, because this is a little bit more project driven than animation is, and you're kind of a little bit more on your own with this one. But I would suggest getting an agent, because they are the ones that can kind of keep a lookout for you for future opportunities and help extend your longevity as an artist choosing this career path. But if you do not want to be the writer or the author behind the book, another job opportunity that still lies in the world of books and publishing is just being an illustrator for books. So I know plenty of people in animation who kind of choose this as a side hustle as well, where you're not writing or responsible for the story behind the book, but you're just providing the drawings and the illustration for a story that is already written. If you want to be an illustrator for a book, you might just be more responsible for receiving a copy of the text or what will be written, or a general layout of what the book is going to look like, and you'll see where the text is laid out, but you will be responsible for just where the illustration is placed, how this illustration is going to work with the text on these pages. Then the other option, if you don't want to draw it, but it's still a pretty good side hustle option or a good entry-level position, is being a colorist, where instead of just drawing the thing, maybe you're already working with an author illustrator who is already providing the story and the illustrations, but they just need somebody to help color it. So you can just provide coloring for these illustrations that are already existing. I think being a colorist is a little bit more unstable and does not have as much longevity. It is just a good side hustle, especially if maybe you're a student and you just want to dabble in something, and being a colorist is more of a short-term commitment that you can take a part of. Or if you're just a newly graduated person, I feel like that's a great opportunity to have. Or if you're someone who's already working a full-time job and you just want an additional income without having a heavy responsibility, being a colorist is a good option. But for now, those are the roles that I can think of in the books and publishing world. I would say that, again, this is kind of more in between full-time and freelance, because it's not like freelance because you are still binding yourself to this project that is a bigger commitment than a short-term freelance project. But at the same time, it's not like as stable as a full-time animation job that could take years for you to be a part of. And in terms of a book, that timeline might be shorter than being in animation. So that's why I would say it is kind of like in between a full-time job and a freelance job. So speaking of freelance, I'm gonna move on to that one next, where you can be a freelance artist. You can provide different services, from animations, illustrations, paintings, designs, for different clients that reach out to you. And I would say the greatest benefit of being a freelancer is that you definitely have the most say in your schedule and you're more in control of it, and you're just being provided a task responsibility that you will deliver it whenever the deadline is set. But otherwise, in between that time and the delivery date, you can kind of choose to work on this project whenever you want to. The only caveat I will say about being a freelancer is that maybe sometimes it might be a little bit more uncertain and unstable, because you have to look out for projects for yourself to line up back to back, which, yeah, in a sense it is similar to animation because you have to line up projects back to back. But I feel like from what I've learned from my friends in freelance is that those opportunities tend to be shorter because you're not really working on this project for years. Some people I know have agents working with them as well, being a freelancer, so they can again help you with the longevity of your career and find opportunities to line up for you back to back, so they help you create that stability. So in a sense, I feel like being a freelancer is a little bit more uncertain at times, but you do have that ability to just create this name and brand for yourself that could eventually evolve to your own business if you do choose to take it to that path. So then another freelance opportunity that is out there and I think is up and coming even more and more these days is being a tattoo artist. Because as a tattoo artist, it's kind of like a freelance job, but it's also a full-time job, especially if you're hired at a very good shop, or if you even started your own business as a tattoo shop owner, then great. But I feel like as a tattoo artist, you have the ability to still create these designs that are fully your own and then provide them to the different clients that you're working with, or have them select among the few illustrations that you've already created. Or there are even times where your client already has an idea of what they want and you can help enhance it so that it translates better when it goes onto their skin. I would say that being a tattoo artist is actually a great option for anybody who is comfortable with working with someone and directly on their skin. But also if you're thinking about developing your own business or brand, a lot of tattoo artists these days are having their own social media platforms where they showcase their work and what type of style they have as a tattoo artist. And you can eventually develop your own brand or business if that is a path you choose to go for. So then next is the world of design. Now I will just fully admit that this is the world that I am the least familiar with. Like, this is stuff that's a little bit out of my realm, but it is a path that was a consideration when I was a high schooler and I didn't know what I wanted to do. Usually when you're working in a design job, you are working with a larger company or brand, and sometimes it might be in the tech field, fashion field. So the first example I will mention is print design, because I actually myself interned as a print designer when I didn't really fully know what I wanted to do. So for some time in my life as a high schooler, I just worked as a print designer in a fashion company where I just pretty much had to collect inspiration for different patterns that suited different timelines, like 70s fashion or 80s fashion, and you check out different patterns of clothing that might exist that could serve as inspiration for this certain style that the project is currently going for. So if you're somebody who really loves creating patterns and working in Illustrator that will eventually be seen on apparel or clothing, that might be something up your alley. But I would say that the act of creating this art is more so focused on the aesthetics and the design and the appeal, more so than like creating a story like animation. Then next is graphic design. I feel like graphic design is usually the most commonly offered art career for anyone who is just, you know, graduating from an art school and doesn't know what they want to do yet. But there are also a lot of great graphic designers out there who really honestly create these logos and designs that make companies look so much more appealing than they actually are. So I would say that similar to print design, graphic design focuses more on logos or elements that represent a certain company, brand. You focus more on the visual composition, typography, you might have to focus more on colors, and how all of these elements are going to eventually work together to communicate this idea that represents your client, your brand. Because at the end of the day, a lot of consumers like to associate themselves with certain brands that align with them. So you kind of also have to know what people out there are currently into. From my perspective, the world of design is a more financially stable career because you're already working with corporate companies or companies that have been existing and have proven to be successful for a very long time. I would say that this is a more financially stable career path if you are an artist and you don't really know what you want to do, but you just want to create art. But I feel like there's always artists who want to create something that has more of an emotional say behind it. So I will say that when it comes to graphic design, it's not as emotional of a career path to choose. So then lastly, the last category that I'll discuss in today's video is being self-employed and being a business owner, which is kind of almost the dream for any artist, I would say, but it's not always the dream simultaneously, because there will be responsibilities that certain people just don't want. So first, I will start off with social media pretty much being a valid career path, because there are artists out there who have proven for this to be true, where you are pretty much representing yourself and your own brand through your art. And behind this, you will need a strong following, of course, because usually to be successful on social media, you do need to have good engagement and a good number of followers in order for you to be sustainable, because you will either be crowdfunding your work like through Patreon or through classes that you are providing for your audience, or you might be providing merch, prints, or selling your physical artwork to people directly. You can probably also get paid through sponsorships and working with different brands who are pretty much using your platform as their space for creating ads. Or you can create a space for ads on your platform or through your videos like on YouTube, where you'll get paid out through AdSense, which is the most common one. So I would say that being a social media artist is going to start off unstable, but it has the ability to grow into a stable career path if you do have the ability to grow a very strong, solid following. But that is the one caveat I will say, is that even though in a way you think you're going to be working for yourself, you're still going to need to work for your audience, because your platform is mostly going to stay alive due to your following. So in a way, you're going to need to constantly appeal to them. It's kind of going to need to be a happy medium between what you want to do and what your audience wants to see from you. And then lastly is being a business owner. So I feel like there are a lot of small business shop owners nowadays who directly sell their artwork to their customers and constantly update their shops. Or you might be somebody who runs a studio, who provides services to different companies. So that's going to be, of course, a more tricky career path because you're going to have more financial instability in the beginning, but again, it can grow into stability, very similar to being a social media artist. I will say that when it comes to being a business owner, your focus is more on providing the product or the service to your customer, but you will also need social media on the side to help promote your business or promote your merchandise or promote your products, because you will need to find that customer somehow or some way, shape or form. You're going to have to create that promotion and that advertising for yourself, because sometimes, honestly, some businesses or brands fail just because they are not good at promoting themselves, even though your art and your work is amazing and great. So in conclusion, I would say that when it comes to picking the right art career for you, you have to ask yourself certain questions and see what it is you want to do at the end of the day, because we could all be drawing, we could all be painting, we could all be designing things, but for what purpose? That is something that you will probably want to ask yourself. So if I were you, I would ask myself these questions. What type of timeline or schedule would I want to work with? Because if you're someone who just really cannot stand working under a structured time with a company, like working a 9 to 5, maybe that might not be for you, and something among the world of freelancing might be more up your alley. And then next, I would ask, do I want my art to have a narrative? Because I feel like what I notice is in a lot of art fields is that there's either storytelling involved or there's no storytelling involved. Like, you're either designing or drawing something for the sake of something look aesthetically pleasing or providing it for a product, or there is going to be artwork where you're fully drawing like a whole scene with characters, people with emotions who undergo an arc of some sort. So if you want to do something that's in storytelling, you might want to do something in the world of animation or publishing. But if not, and you just want to draw and just call it a day and live your life, maybe you might want to do something more in the world of design where you have that financial stability. And then 3 is, how financially risky are you willing to be? Because if you really cannot afford that financial risk of just not having a job, then maybe you might want to focus more on a job that starts off more in a corporate world like designing, and then gain that financial stability to then go into animation, freelancing, or whatever it is you want to do. If you feel like, hey, I still want to do something that might not be as financially stable, but I need to develop my finances first, it is not a bad idea to just switch later on in life. And I feel like there should be no shame in that. There are a lot of artists I know who have came from a different career path, and it's very normal to do so. And I think that it should be more normalized to want to find financial stability before just jumping the gun and choosing a job that might not be as financially stable. So I hope that that ultimately helped you in thinking about what art career might be more suitable for you, because it might have to depend on your lifestyle, the type of art you want to create, and how much time you're willing to invest on certain projects. So keep those in mind. It's not just about drawing at the end of the day. It's not just about painting. It's about how you want to live your life. I personally knew that the art I created, I wanted it to have a story. I want to be working with characters and working with some sort of narrative. I personally did not find much fulfillment in working in the world of design, but that could be different for somebody else out there who enjoys working with design. And at the end of the day, art doesn't always need to be that deep, you know? You don't always need to be telling some beautiful emotional story. Sometimes you just want to draw something good, design something good, and that's it. And I don't blame people for that. So here are just the options that exist for anybody who is just getting started in their careers, and maybe just starting in one of these career paths might help you get a better understanding of what you might want to do in the future. So thanks for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one. So peace out and stay wholesome, bitches.
Do you want to
model being used back when I thought I could customize it, and that feature straight up doesn't exist at all. I asked and they said, no. This video is brought to you by Squarespace, the best all-in-one platform to build beautiful sites for any and all of your needs, from portfolios to online stores. Hey guys, it's Celestia. And although it might sound strange given that I just introduced a sponsor, today we're going to be talking about bad sponsorships. Specifically, why I recently had to turn down a huge sponsorship, like huge for me at least, because of how deceptively and maliciously their product was being marketed, only to see that a much bigger channel in the art community endorsed them anyway. It was an experience that really made me think about the way that we, both as creators and audiences, interact with sponsored content, especially because before now, I really only had one side of the story, the audiences. I was looking at all these sponsored shoutouts on the channels I was watching and thinking, oh, cool, it must be good if this person I respect and enjoy is willing to stand by it and put their name on it. And I often did end up giving the things that they were endorsing more of a shot than I would have if they hadn't. But this whole experience really showed me that there's a lot more to it than that. There's a dark side to sponsorships on the creator side of things, and not all of them are what they seem, which was made abundantly clear to me when I saw firsthand how dishonest the sponsor was, and then watched a huge name in the community sell their audience on their service anyway. I won't be talking about this sponsor or creator specifically by name, but I will be getting into the problems that can very easily result from creators endorsing products or services that they themselves don't use or believe in. Before I do though, let me take a moment to talk about today's sponsor, one that I do use and believe in, Squarespace. Squarespace wouldn't do this to us. We love Squarespace in this house. I was actually so excited when they reached out because I had already started using it several months prior to host and create my art studio's website, and I know firsthand how good, reliable, and easy to use it is. If you're unfamiliar, Squarespace is a website building and hosting tool, and it makes making anything from an online store to a portfolio as simple and seamless as possible, with flexible templates and straightforward, versatile building tools. For my studio, I needed to be able to show a multitude of different image galleries in order to showcase all of the different portfolios, and their many gallery options and automatic image scaling made that unbelievably easy. And with the ability to quickly and accessibly integrate e-commerce and even print on demand into your Squarespace website, I could easily update it to accept orders and commissions directly. If I were a more organized person, I probably should. Anyway, thank you so much to Squarespace for sponsoring this video, and please go check out squarespace.com to get a free trial to build your own website, be it a portfolio for your art or a store to sell it on, or even both. And once you've built it, go to squarespace.com/DuchessCelestia to save 10% on your first website or domain purchase. All of that said, let's move on to the main topic. Let me tell you why I threw away a $600 sponsorship and why I stand by that decision, despite the fact that I needed that money for basic living expenses. $600 isn't even what I normally make from them. The sponsor was just particularly generous, which made losing it an even harder pill to swallow. But anyway, context. As I mentioned, I have no intention of naming this sponsor, and I will be sharing as little specific information about them as possible to protect their privacy. But suffice it to say that what they wanted me to promote was software. And at first, it did seem promising, so I agreed to try it out and move forward with the sponsorship. They let me try out the paid version for free, and it started out good. There were a lot of features that did work well, but it also crashed upwards of 25 times in the hour I spent using it. And then I started trying to use the features that they advertised the most, only to learn that, okay, well, I have to be a little specific here because of the nature of it, but the sponsor heavily marketed it as a free VTuber software, specifically using the verbiage, it can turn you into a cartoon virtual human, which is carefully worded to sound like you can customize the VTuber model without actually saying that you can. And that's because you can't. There are a handful of default VTuber presets that you can choose from that you can't change at all, which they deliberately leave out of all of their information on their website. And they want the channels that they sponsor to leave it out too, and use one of the presets as if it's their own so that people think the program has that feature. Like, this is a key feature that they're trying to sell people on, and the program doesn't even have it. Their site also specifically says that the VTuber models can mimic pre-recorded audio, which I was relying on it being able to do in order to actually show the model being used back when I thought I could customize it. And that feature straight straight up doesn't exist at all. I asked and they said, nope, impossible, it can't do it. So at this point, I'm already backing out and telling them, dude, this program doesn't do anything you're trying to get me to tell people that it does. And I take a closer look at the sponsorship brief again to see exactly what they said about those features. And I notice that there's a section that deadass says, make it sound like it's free, but don't actually say that it's free, because it's not. The free version's incredibly limited, and if you want to use it without those limits, you gotta pay. And you gotta pay quite a bit, and via subscription-based payments too, and you guys know how I feel about those. Most of you usually tend to feel the same. I mean, you can pay a one-time fee of $75, but you still have to pay a monthly fee for premium features, so I failed to see the point, honestly. And I mean, this is my bad. I get that. I should have read the brief more carefully before agreeing to the sponsorship, because if I'd read that part rather than skimmed it, I never would have taken it in the first place. I understand that marketing needs to be a little sneaky sometimes to get people interested and enticed, but it's effectively the same as a clickbaity YouTube title. You need to be a little clickbaity to get people to click the video, but you can't lie, or at least you shouldn't. A good clickbaity title asks or inspires a question a little dramatically that the video answers. A bad clickbaity title asks that question without the video answering it. Like there was this one from a while ago that I've mentioned before as an example because it just fills me with rage, like most things. The video was called something like, I ran over my ex with a car, and the video was just her singing about running over her ex with a car. That right there is bad clickbait. That does not deliver the content that the title promised. Although, in fairness, I am glad that no one got hit by a car. But it might have been acceptable if that overdramatic title preceded a video with a much less dramatic story about her lightly hitting her ex with her bumper or something. Similarly, you can neglect to mention that a product is a paid service to get people's interest so that they look into it and find out for themselves, but if you deliberately imply or lead people to believe that it is free when it isn't, I personally find that scummy, especially when the not free product doesn't even have the features that it's advertised to. And I don't want to be associated with that, which is one of the many reasons that I told them I was no longer interested. But before I shut that door altogether, I took one more look at the email chain between myself and their representative, and I saw that linked in the promotional materials was a sponsored video by another creator in the art community on YouTube, with a much bigger channel than mine, like over 1 million subscribers. And they were, lo and behold, promoting this software with a huge focus on it being a free, easy way to become a VTuber, which it's not at all. And that's what really got me conflicted and contemplative about this, because this is someone that has a lot of influence, and someone whose judgment and endorsement I, as a viewer, would have been inclined to trust. And I never would have known to question it if it weren't for my own first-hand experience on their end of sponsorships. But I also want to make it abundantly clear that I'm not trying to shit on this creator for that. I'm not trying to say that because I felt the sponsor was deceptive and snaky, I can factually assert that they are. It's just my opinion. It's entirely possible that this creator doesn't share that opinion, and I 100% acknowledge that that's more than fair. It's just also possible that they did think the sponsor was scummy, but saw the amount they were offering to pay and decided to go ahead with it anyway, which, I mean, I struggle to judge that too. Squad's sponsorship calculator estimates that they probably got paid something up to $20,000 for it, and that is a large amount of money to turn down just because of any moral issues you might have with the sponsor or the product. $20,000 is a car or a down payment on a house or a vacation or a year's worth of living expenses if you're living very well within your means. And to get that, or even half of that, just to sell a shitty product you know doesn't work is, I mean, I can understand why that would not be an easy decision. Capitalism makes life miserable and unbearable for almost all of us, and considering money when it comes to tough decisions isn't something I feel right or realistic demonizing. If they sold out for that amount of money despite believing the sponsor to be dishonest, I can't judge that. People need money, and it is easy to sit on a soapbox and say, you're an asshole for promoting this, but it's a lot harder to imagine what I would do in their position. All of that long-winded bullshit is to say that my point in bringing this creator up as an example isn't to say that they're bad for endorsing this sponsor. My point is that I, as a member of their audience, would have been inclined to trust that product based on their endorsement alone, and only knew better because I had already tried the product and seen their sponsorship brief firsthand. And that made me think hard about how we as audiences actually interact with sponsored content, and how we as creators have a subsequently much larger responsibility than we might think to carefully screen and consider what we endorse. I'm not saying I, as a viewer, would buy a product just because a creator I enjoy said it's good. I think myself and most others still possess at least enough free thinking to question that first and judge the product for ourselves. And we're not just instantly brainwashed by what some YouTuber has to say in a sponsor segment. That being said, we are still influenced by it, even if it's not even always on a conscious level. Like, I wouldn't buy a $500 gaming chair that I don't need because a creator I liked was sponsored to advertise it. But I might consider using a new drawing program over the one that I was using before, even if I hadn't planned on switching, because an artist that I admire endorsed it. To enjoy a creator's channel, for the most part, means having at least some semblance of trust in their integrity, which means also having an inherent bias towards the belief that they wouldn't lie to you by endorsing anything that they don't believe in. But in reality, that's just the best faith interpretation. For a lot of creators, money may well be the reason that they're endorsing what they are, rather than genuine support and appreciation of the product. And like I already said, that's a hard thing to judge when money literally makes the world go round, and we all have rent to pay. But it's still something that we, as their viewers, should try to personally be more conscious of, because reminding ourselves of that context will help us to judge the sponsored products and services that we see more objectively and carefully. A big creator putting their name on something should not be, by default, taken to mean that it's good, and we're the ones responsible for making that distinction. It's also worth noting that in a lot of cases, the creators endorsing shady sponsors might not even know that they are shady. There are a lot of honest mistakes made in that regard that I do not at all mean to shit on. Yes, in this case, the sponsor was pretty obviously manipulative and the product was pretty obviously bad, but because of that, I was prompted to dig deeper into their company, and only then did I learn that this is not a one-off incident. They've got a documented history of selling software that doesn't work and using business tactics that one report says are not an outright scam, but as close as it gets to one. So even if this particular product was good and the sponsor was honest, I still easily could have missed the underlying shadiness of the company itself without further research. And then, I mean, yes, creators should be thoroughly researching their sponsors whenever possible, and it's very easy to say that, but I feel like most people don't realize how much work goes into running a YouTube channel. I spend 10 to 15 hours a day working on mine, and adding research for every sponsor to the end of those days when I could instead get some well-needed sleep sometimes feels too exhausting to do, which is why I only skimmed that brief, and I definitely learned my lesson that the sacrifice of sleep is worth it, and I won't be making that mistake again. But my point is that making time for even more research isn't always something that creators have the time or energy to do, and I'm not saying that means they shouldn't, but I am saying I understand that they're just human and people make mistakes. It doesn't help when the company looks so convincing and legitimate that questioning them doesn't necessarily even occur to you right off the bat, which was the case with this one. But even beyond researching their sponsors, I still think that what this has shown me to be even more important is the creator's responsibility to be honest with their audience. Whether they're always aware of it or not, viewers do put some amount of trust in the recommendations given by creators they enjoy, even if it's just a small amount. And I personally believe that we as creators need to treat that trust with respect and not abuse it. In my opinion, if what you're promoting is something that you can't or won't use yourself, it's dishonest to promote it as if it is. And I think audiences are owed a little more than that. And I know I just said that I can understand why creators sell out for that sweet, sweet sponsor money. And I know I said I can't rightfully judge them for doing so when literally everyone needs money. And I know that's contradictory. I see both sides now, and that's an incredibly frustrating position to be in. I believe that audiences deserve to be treated with honesty and respect when it comes to sponsored content, but I also understand that creators are, at the end of the day, doing a job and they need to be paid for it. I get both sides, and I subsequently get that there's no right or wrong answer here. Just me and a million goddamn opinions that I won't stop spewing, apparently. Not that that's a shocker. At the end of the day, I guess I can really only speak for myself and for what this whole experience has taught me. Like, for one, I need to put a lot less blind faith into the endorsements given by creators I like, and be a lot more careful to judge those products critically and on my own. I also learned that I'm pretty goddamn stupid and naive for a marketing consultant, given that I've seen these shitty marketing techniques a million times and still managed to not think to apply that knowledge to my view on YouTube sponsorships. And finally, and most importantly, this whole thing showed me exactly how important it is to only ever endorse sponsors that I actually believe in, like Squarespace or Printify or Wingfox, because that endorsement really isn't worth a whole hell of a lot to me or my audience if anyone can buy it for $600. I feel like it can be a slippery slope with sponsors. It's easy to make excuses for a product's shortcomings and endorse it anyway if they're particularly generous, and turning a blind eye to one fault can easily turn into turning a blind eye to 10. And before you know it, you're selling your audience on something that just isn't what you're saying it is anymore. And I almost fell into that trap in a combination of naivety and desperation for funding. So in that regard, I'm actually really grateful to have had this experience be the eye-opener that it was, because I can say now with absolute confidence that I know the red sponsor flags to watch out for. And you can trust that anything I recommend to you guys on this channel is going to be something that I 100% support and use myself. I know this probably sounded preachy or virtue signally or, oh, look at me, I turned down money for morals, but I don't mean it to, and I certainly don't want it to. I understand the other side better than ever now, and I can't say with complete confidence that I wouldn't have been tempted interested if I were in that other creator's shoes. In fact, I 100% hands down would have been. I'm not trying to pass judgment like some pillar of morality, because quite frankly, my own morality is more aptly summed up by that tweet that's just like, introducing a new alignment, chaotic lawful. I have a strict moral code, but nobody can figure out what the hell it is. I just feel like the darker side of sponsorships on the creator side of things isn't something that's talked about enough, and that maybe having a wider, more open conversation about it will help creators and viewers alike when it comes to making decisions in these situations. At the end of the day, the only real assholes here that I'm judging are the sponsors lying to their customers about defective products, and everyone else is just kind of doing their best with what they've got, at least in my opinion. But that's really it for this one. What do you guys think? What are your thoughts as either viewers or creators yourselves on the nature of YouTube sponsorships these days? How much stock do you put in the endorsements that you see online? Let me know in the comments, because I'm guessing this is something everyone's gonna have a very different experience with. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope you enjoyed today's video. Special thank you as always to channel members Cafe Soleil, Joseph Solomon, Unknown Code, Lucian Izapa, and Abyss Reborn, as well as patrons Batman, Kyle Lowe, Shirome Artiste, Elenkshi, Soul Crystal, and Kenya Yen for their support, and I'll see you in the next one. Hey guys, it's Celestia, and today we're going to talk about something that was regularly keeping me up at night in a pit of existential dread up until I researched it for this video, and that's AI-generated art. But to explain to you why it's been fueling my insomnia, and that of many others so relentlessly, there are like a million things I have to explain to you first. So throughout the video, I'll be going over all of the following 4 sections. What AI art is, whether or not it's real art, why artists are freaking out about it, and whether or not it's actually anything to freak out about at all. Naturally, let's start with AI art. What actually is it? AI-generated art is, simply put, exactly what it sounds like. Art, although it being called that is a point of contention in and of itself, that's generated by an artificial intelligence. On a more technical level, in terms of how it's actually made, my knowledge is quite limited, which is partially because there just isn't one way. There are many, many apps and programs out there now that do the same thing in different ways, and all of them fall under the same umbrella of AI-generated art. But from what I have learned, in most cases, these services use 2 artificial neural networks that play off of each other to generate an image that is as true as possible to the prompt that the human using it inputs. Or generative adversarial network, an algorithm developed by researchers from Rutgers University, Facebook AI Research, and College of Charleston, is comprised of 2 parts: the generator and the discriminator. The generator creates the image based on the prompt, and the discriminator tries to determine whether or not the image is real or fake, based on the aesthetics that it has been trained on using a database of over 81,500 paintings. To my understanding, they bounce back and forth until the discriminator can no longer tell if the image that the generator creates is real or fake, at which point it delivers you what it believes is a realistic piece of art based on your prompt. I believe different apps use different networks, which is why the pieces that they create can yield such different results. But the basic process of how AI art is created is largely the same. While I haven't used many of these tools myself because the vast majority are either not free or have a waitlist, I did try out Night Cafe on PC and Wamba on iPhone, both for this video and out of personal curiosity. Both allow you to not just input a text prompt for the AI to use, but to also pick an art style for it to depict that prompt in. I spent quite a while messing around with the different ones they had available, and am personally quite partial to Blacklight and Ghibli on Wamba and oil painting on Night Cafe. For your guys' reference, here are some examples of the pieces that they both made with the prompt Abandoned Mall, which I picked because of a project that I'm working on that I was seeking inspiration for. As you can see, it's pretty fucking cool. And while many aspects, especially on the Wamba piece, don't make any technical, realistic sense, both do very clearly read as abandoned malls. Another interesting thing was that on Night Cafe, they let you choose the algorithm that it uses for generation, either creative or coherent. Artistic is better at creating beautiful textures, and Coherent is better at composing the image. Wamba doesn't have this, which I imagine is partially to blame for why the pieces I've generated on it are a lot less compositionally sound. Once again, for your reference, here is that same prompt rendered in both algorithms. As you can see, the one generated through the Coherent algorithm is, indeed, much more coherent. Another option Night Cafe offers that Wamba does not is the opportunity to evolve your image. You take the original image that it just generated for you and add a second prompt to it, be that another text prompt or another style modifier. In this case, I changed abandoned mall to overgrown abandoned mall, and added neon and synthwave to the styles. And because I used the image created with the Coherent algorithm, I did that for the evolution too. This is what it made. And I gotta say, the way it maintained the composition and the values of the original piece while adding the exact elements that I wanted to see was unbelievably impressive to me, and if Night Cafe weren't a paid service beyond the first 5 free credits, I would be sold on using it to thumbnail all of the base environment concepts for my secret project that I can't talk about but keep kind of talking about, sorry. I'm still kind of tempted to look into their pricing options, honestly, but that's a tangent to go off on in another video, because if I do decide to try to implement that into the creation process, I think it would be kind of cool to let you guys know how it goes. Anyway, now that I've kind of half-assed explained what AI art is, let's get into one of the most hotly debated questions in the art community right now, especially the fine art community. Is AI art real art? Now, in fairness, what is and isn't real art is a topic that's been debated to death every time the art community is given a new tool and decides to police whether or not the use of that tool is offensive to their delicate artist sensibilities. We saw it with digital art being criticized for the use of computer-based tools, brushes, and editing features, and subsequently demeaned as not real art. We saw it with artists being called out for using 3D models to improve the anatomy in their pieces. We saw it with photo bashing, and even with manga artists and comic artists being shit on for openly and transparently tracing over stock backgrounds to save themselves production time. The art community is no stranger to gatekeeping in terms of what is and isn't real art, and there will always be purists looking to redefine the term to inflate their own egos and deflate other subgroups of artists' egos in the process. And for some, that's what this debate comes down to, less about the art itself and more about the amount of effort that goes into it. Sitting down and letting Night Cafe make me environment renders that could easily be used for something professional does not make me an artist, and yet many people are using these tools and claiming themselves to be artists for that alone. Not to mention selling those pieces, sometimes as NFTs, displaying them in galleries, and growing entire followings based on that. And in that case, I don't think there's much debate to be had at all. Using an AI art generator to make art does not make you an artist. But it becomes more complicated and nuanced when it comes to people using AI-generated art for their own art as a tool, which is both viable and very, very lucrative as a concept right now. See, AI art rarely, if ever, creates a finished piece. It also almost exclusively creates quite low-resolution images. So for a lot of artists, using these apps and services isn't done with the intention of getting those images and calling it a day, but rather using those images for their own work. Let me give you 5 examples. First, an artist wants to draw a character in a neon alleyway covered in graffiti. They know what character they want to draw and how they want to draw them, and they can see the vague outline of how they want the piece to look in their heads, but they don't have much more than that. They put neon alleyway into an AI art generator, and now they have 10 thumbnails that they can use almost like customized references. Now they know what color palette they want to use. They have a good grasp on the composition they're going for, and the generator was likely able to create some good abstract graffiti for them to draw inspiration from, whereas before all they knew was that they wanted there to be some kind of graffiti somewhere. 2. An artist is designing an alien species for a character concept art. The human mind is fairly limited in terms of what it can imagine as features for an alien that aren't based on already existing species that it's seen. But an AI, it's got tens of thousands of pieces of art to consult and no concept of what is realistic or not to limit what it creates based on them. That concept artist probably got 15 completely nonsensical pieces of AI art when they gave it the prompt alien with whatever adjectives they found pertinent, and none of them would work on their own. But now their concept art has a vastly more diverse pool of individual character features to draw from that might never have occurred to them before. 3. An artist knows what they want to draw, but they don't know how they want the composition of a piece to look. They type the gist of what they want to draw into an AI art generator, and now they have a litany of possible compositional concepts to draw inspiration from. 4. An artist loves the Ghibli style of art, but it's nothing like they've ever painted before. They generate a piece of AI art in that style, based on a prompt that they want to draw, and now they have kind of a baseline image of how that would look in that style, so they can effectively scale it up, draw over it or edit it, and learn to draw that kind of a style with a direct and personalized reference as to how their idea would look in it. They don't want to claim this art to be completely their own, and they don't intend to post it or hide that it was done with the help of AI art, they just want to use it for this study. 5. An artist sucks at backgrounds and finds no joy in creating them. They're not a professional, they aren't selling this work, and they're not studying to improve, but they just happen to enjoy drawing characters and not backgrounds. With AI-generated art, they're able to create a background for the character they've already drawn, and now they don't have to draw the background that they wanted themselves. They don't claim to have created the background, but they are now able to post a finished piece that conveys the idea they had in their heads without having to slave over a background they would have hated making and held no value to them to create. These are just a handful of ways that AI-generated art could phenomenally improve the lives of artists if used as a tool, and they're also just a handful of ways that other artists could claim they're cheating by doing so. If it's a question of whether or not AI-generated art is real art when used by artists to create their pieces, I think it's something that's going to spark quite a bit of controversy going forwards, especially as that particular use grows in popularity. Personally, I think that as long as the artist is honest and doesn't claim AI art as their own, it's just another tool that artists can use to learn, grow, and save time, and that shouldn't be demonized. But that's just me. It's obviously a more complex issue the more you dive into it, and I'd actually be really interested to hear what you guys think about it, because I'm still a little conflicted myself. But whether or not AI art, as used by artists to create their own art, is real art, is not actually the most contentious issue here. What has most people understandably up in arms about this is the question of whether AI itself is able to create real art. I'm not talking about people claiming themselves to be artists because they made AI-generated art, or people using AI-generated art to make their own work. I'm talking about the AI art itself, with no human artist involved. Is what these algorithms create art? That's something that the art community has been arguing about for months now, and while there's no concrete answer that I can give you, as it's really just a matter of opinion, I can at least explain both sides to you and give you my take on it. Most people don't believe that AI-generated art should be considered real art, because of one fundamental rule. Art cannot be defined by anything other than creativity. If a painting of a blue square is just as artistically valid as the Mona Lisa, we must acknowledge that art itself can't be defined by any visually quantifiable parameters. The only thing they both have in common, though, is that they were both an artist's interpretation of subject matter. Subsequently, it's not a huge leap to then posit that while creativity itself cannot be defined, we could at least tentatively summarize it as an artist's ability to interpret their intentions, views, stories, or feelings into a medium, but AI doesn't do that. This isn't an AI that's designed to think like a human creating these pieces, which, for the record, lambda scare aside, I do not believe currently exists yet. It's two neural networks completing pre-designated tasks and subsequently creating an image. It doesn't have an idea or a concept or even a desire to create, because it is not currently capable of that. It requires a human to give it that idea, and even then, it's not creating anything based on what it imagines that prompt to be associated with. It's consulting a database of already made art by humans to combine into one image. So if we're agreeing that creativity can at least be defined by the intent to communicate a thought or concept, and we're also agreeing that an AI itself is not creating or visualizing a concept, we also have to accept, based on this argument, that AI is not capable of creativity. And if the only agreed upon definition of art is that it demonstrates creativity, then that means that an artificial intelligence cannot, without human input, create real art. Others, however, argue that the definition of creativity is too rigid, even based on those parameters. One article, linked amongst other sources in the description, likens AI art to the birth of modern art, Marcel Duchamp, the dude who put a urinal in an art gallery and called it art. As the article puts it, Duchamp's ready-made pieces brought these objects to view in a new way, and it caused audiences to ask new questions, such as, is this even art? What am I looking at? What did the artist actually do here? What is a work of art anyway? And should we not restrict the definition a bit? The article then goes on to assert that in the author's opinion, we shouldn't be restricting the definition of art, we should be expanding it. They say the following: art doesn't even need to have a physical form. It can be completely immaterial. What matters is the decisions the artist makes, how the public interacts with it, and what it means to the community and culture from which it springs. In AI-generated art, it might seem like the computer is making all the decisions. It may be that the artist doesn't understand everything the algorithm is doing. But nothing at all will happen without input from someone. That's the point where you'll find the art. When a person calculates how to weight their ML models, or makes decisions about training data, or makes any other choices about how to initiate the process. They continue a bit more about that concept in the article, so I encourage you to read it yourselves. But while I acknowledge that what they're saying is correct, I also disagree with it in its own context. What I mean is that the author used that argument to claim that AI-generated art is real on a philosophical level because of the human involvement in its creation, and that's precisely why I believe this argument is faulty. if the only way in which AI-generated art can be considered real art in and of itself is the way in which it was created to do so by a human and the human input required to make it, then the AI art itself is not art. Instead, I would personally posit that that would mean that the algorithm itself, as created by one human or a team of humans, is the art, and everything created using it is simply artistically passing output. Others make what I consider to be a more compelling argument, that because AI art is not constrained by the same rules and conventions of human-created art, and is subsequently not inherently created to please either the viewer or the creator, it can therefore actually be more creative and original than human-created art. I personally find this intellectually fascinating as a concept, but also impossible to quantify like most of these concepts. And on a fundamental level, while I do see where people with this stance are coming from, it still kind of comes down to the same bottom line for me. While the results of the automated generation may not be bound by conventional art standards, that isn't because the thing that made it was creative or artistic or intended for that result, but rather that the alleged creativity was simply an unintentional byproduct of what is effectively a randomized process based on human-created data and art. Basically, in my opinion, the result is creative, but the process that created it wasn't. If an artist with no training throws paint at a canvas randomly enough times, they'll replicate an abstract masterpiece. That doesn't mean they had any artistic vision, it means that they replicated a technical process enough times to get lucky. And that, in my opinion, is what AI art does when it comes down to capturing a level of creativity that humans cannot. Finally, one more example that many have recently been using to defend AI-generated art as being real is Aika, whose name is actually a really cute little pun because she's named after Ada Lovelace, but her name is spelled AI-duh, and that's just undeniably adorable no matter what you think about the rest of this. Aika is an AI that, with the help of her robotic body and algorithm-based intelligence, is touted as the world's first robot artist. She sees with cameras embedded in her eyes and can recognize humans, animals, still life subjects, and even other pieces of art so that she can depict and replicate them. She can also use uploaded images as reference, just like us, sort of. The most information I could find about how she actually produces her art was, it's an algorithm that determines coordinates for her robot arm to draw on, which is alarmingly little, but given that her creators probably want to maintain the shrouded mystique of their creation and ensure that no one else can steal their process, I can't drag their asses too hard for not advertising how they made her. But the point is, people are using Aika as an example of an AI that can truly and organically replicate human creativity, and I don't think she's any different than Night Cafe or Wamba. Obviously, she was created with different methods and runs differently as well, although I can't substantiate or explain that without more information from her creators. But she's ultimately still an AI using a database of human art to duplicate it. Yes, she's drawing real subjects if needed, and can sit there and talk, and wear artsy clothes and a cute little bob wig, but ultimately, if she was just the algorithm that she is underneath all that, she would be no different than any other AI generative art program. She's using real-life images of her subjects to create that art, which gives the illusion of creativity compared to them. But she's still imitating that creativity by using previous works created by humans. She's just doing it more accurately because she has cameras and they don't. If she didn't look vaguely humanoid, she wouldn't be any different. Especially considering the fact that you can actually submit existing photos to a lot of AI art generators and accomplish the same thing. I think Aika is fascinating, but based on that logic, I agree with a lot of the people commenting on her existence and her work, that the people who created her are the artists, and Aika herself is just the art. That makes her no less impressive, of course, but it does mean that she is not, on her own, capable of creativity or the creation of art independent from human input. So we're now 6 pages into my dumbass script, and we've established what AI art is and whether or not it's real art, potentially. So let's move on to the next point. Why are artists everywhere so scared of it? Well, there are a lot, and I mean a lot of reasons. Let me try to rapid fire shoot them at you to save time, and then address them all in more detail in the next section. 1, people are concerned that AI art is, or at least will become, indistinguishable from human-created art, and will subsequently replace real artists, both in terms of jobs and other non-professional creative endeavors, even societally. 2, people will claim the AI-generated art that they prompted to creation as their own, despite the fact that the art was technically created by the person that wrote the AI, AI, and then publicly take credit for it or sell it, and no one will be able to tell the difference. 3. It's devaluing human-created art just by existing. 4. It will take away industry jobs from artists because rather than hiring real people, industries will instead choose to use either free or cheaper AI alternatives. And 5, as I mentioned before, it blurs the line between what is a tool for artists to use and what is a replacement for artists' hard work. I know that was like a half-assed baby of a section, but I wanted to explain the issues that people have with them quickly, given how much time I've already taken up. Especially considering that I'm about to address each of those 5 issues in more detail based on whether or not they seem reasonable based on the scientific evidence that we've been provided. That in mind, let's move on to the final section. Should artists be scared of AI art? Is it going to replace us and take our jobs and oversaturate our medium? Let's get into it. First, the claim that AI art is, or at least will be, indistinguishable from human art. The first thing I've seen a lot of people cite is a very misleading article, also linked in the resources of this video, which claims the following. Interestingly, when the AI-generated images were placed beside contemporary human artworks, human evaluators could not tell which images were artificially generated. I looked into this, which the article itself made alarmingly difficult by not including its sources, and found that the exact same group, being Rutgers University, Facebook AI Research, and College of Charleston, published their studies on it, and their studies do not objectively reflect what the article claimed they did. They did 4 experiments with human evaluators. And artists, also linked in the description's resources, to determine not only whether or not human subjects could distinguish human art from AI art, but also how much they could aesthetically appreciate that art, comparatively, and whether or not they could personally interpret any meaning from it. And those studies reported some very conflicting results. Yes, the majority of participants were unable to distinguish AI art from human-created art in some of the experiments, but that statistic was still quite close to 50-50, and it was also not that straightforward. The genre was very, very relevant. When it comes to generating environments, really anything without people or living creatures in it, AI can do a fantastic job of replicating it. But as soon as you introduce anything living into that piece, AI immediately seems to struggle to interpret it, and the study reflects that, which is why that article is disingenuous in my opinion, to claim that humans cannot distinguish AI-generated art from human-generated art, because the difficulty becomes inconclusive and difficult to quantify when context isn't considered. Yes, humans struggle to differentiate between abstract AI art and abstract human art, but if it's realistic art, there's no question. People can almost always tell them apart because at the end of the day, without human editing or revision, AI art almost always looks like an uncanny valley version of what it's supposed to be. Yes, it does read exceedingly well as whatever its prompt was anyway, but it's still full of inconsistencies, things that make absolutely no sense, and a litany of evidence that it was not drawn with a vision, but created with an algorithm. So with that in mind, no, I don't think that with AI art generators existing at their current level of quality, artists should fear their work becoming indistinguishable from it, at least in my opinion. Abstract artists and environment artists may be at a higher risk of it based on current studies, but ultimately I still don't think that AI has the skill or creativity to replicate artwork on a refined enough level to be identical to human work. At least not to anyone other than its own discriminator. That said, it's very, very impressive, and it's improved at such a rapid pace already that I'm personally of the belief that it could get to that point eventually. I obviously don't know that for sure, and I am just speculating, but if these programs continue to learn and improve at the rate that they are, I don't think it's at all impossible for them to get to a point where no one can tell their images apart from real artists' work. And to me, that's scary as fuck, and I do think that artists are being perfectly reasonable to fear that, because it opens the door to a plethora of problems for us. And reading all of these studies celebrating when humans can't tell their program's images from artists' work, and knowing that they're only striving to make that more difficult, does not reassure me. For programmers, sure, that's a win. For artists? Well, clearly none of them are thinking about the artists here. Just like in the majority of AI research, in my opinion. They're too busy thinking of all of the things that they could do, and failing to think of whether or not they should. Next, number 2. The concern that people will sell AI-generated art as their own, claim to have created it themselves, and no one, buyers or artists, will be able to tell that they're lying. Once again, this is one that does scare me a little, because I think it's based on a lot of very reasonable, realistic, and possible concerns. Like I said, there are some instances, largely genre-based, in which AI art looks a lot like human art, and it takes a trained eye to tell it apart in some cases. And if people are taking that art and selling it or promoting it to an audience that does not have a trained eye and telling telling them they drew it with their own two very talented hands, I don't think it's unrealistic to imagine that they could actually find some success doing so. That said, I also think it would be a scam with a very short lifespan, because unless that person is actually a skilled artist themselves, there are two main hurdles that they would face pretty early on. One, the moment anyone asks them to draw a person, an animal, or anything very, very specific, be it for the sake of a commission or to prove they're not using a generator, it's going to be very clear based on the quality of the work that their generator produces that they did not, in fact, draw it. They would have to never take commissions and never engage with anyone questioning the originality and validity of their work, and the latter of which would inevitably become impossible if their goal is to grow a large following. Two, the increasingly commonplace knowledge of AI art in the first place, and the ability of more and more people to both recognize and even replicate it. I don't think that I could look at a piece or series of pieces posted and sold online and confidently assert with any degree of certainty that they were 100% made by an AI and not the artist claiming to have made them, much less recognize the networks or styles or prompts and recreate them to prove it. I don't think a lot of people could, but I do think that experts in the field of AI art could, and if these scam artists grew big enough, I think their audience would absolutely end up including more than a small handful of those experts that could and would debunk their scam with relative ease. I mean, here are 3 images generated on Wamba with the mystical style and the prompt abandoned mall. They're all different, yes, but they also all show some very consistent indicators across the board that they are all the same subject matter created with the same style. And I think with enough regenerations, it would eventually create the same original image, or at least something exceptionally close. So if you know the programs well enough and you can guess the prompt the person is using, you can presumably recreate it eventually and prove that they used one of these apps. So yes, ultimately, I think this is a reasonable fear in that it could present a problem, and maybe even already has, but I also think that it's limited and could only really ever present a relatively small scale problem. It's also worth mentioning that a lot of these AI art generators' creators maintain the copyright for whatever they produce, and many either do not allow the commercial sale of them at all, or charge users for that privilege. Which, yes, means that the user in this case could pay them for that privilege and then have the legal right to sell that work. But it also means something more interesting in this case, which is that the majority of these programs' creators feel confident in their ability to police it, which means that in all likelihood, they too could debunk the claims of any artist claiming to have made these works themselves, if only to protect their copyright. This does become murkier when we add to the equation that artists might take AI-generated art, draw over it, and then claim the finished product to be completely original. And number 1, should that be considered a bad thing? Should AI art be considered an artistic tool that artists shouldn't have to disclose that they used? Personally, I think that if an artist used AI as a reference, they shouldn't be obligated to disclose that. But if they literally took an AI-generated piece and drew over it, they should. But that's just my opinion, and I'm sure that will differ amongst others. Regardless of whether or not it's right, though, the larger issue remains. Would people be able to tell? Honestly, I don't know. With photo bashing, all it takes is the ability to recognize the original photo that the artist used, and you can prove that they used photo bashing if they're claiming otherwise. With AI art, if they transformed the original piece enough, it could be borderline impossible to tell, much less empirically prove that the artist didn't create the entire thing themselves. And I can absolutely agree that that's something to be concerned about. Next, number 3, the concern that AI art is devaluing human art just by existing. This one is complicated because that's a very subjective and philosophical stance that can be neither proven nor disproven. Some people feel like AI art is downright offensive because they've spent years upon years studying and perfecting their artwork, and now people with no skill or practice can produce similar things with little to no effort needed. Some people view this advancement as less of an advancement and more of a degradation of the art community, and because this whole fear is based on opinion and not fact, I can't say much either way as to whether or not it has any validity. I can personally see both sides, and while I lean more towards the side that sees it as a promising tool for artists rather than the side that sees it as an offense to art, I do thoroughly understand why people feel this way. So let's move on to number 4, the fear that AI art generators will take industry jobs away from real artists because they're a cheaper and easier alternative that employers would likely prefer to use. And in fairness, I do think this fear has some validity because most industries are already seeing this. AI is writing copy, writing essays, writing blog posts, and stealing jobs from real people with every improvement in its ability to do so. And if industries can use AI to successfully fulfill their art needs, they absolutely will choose to do so, rather than employ a real artist that will take longer and charge more. But as it stands, I don't think they can. I don't think, from an industry perspective, that AI art generators alone can adequately complete any of the responsibilities of any type of current art position, because they can't create finished, polished pieces with consistency or accuracy. If industries want to use AI art to fulfill these human-occupied art positions, they're gonna need to hire trained experts in AI art to tailor the algorithm and specifications to what they want it to create. And even then, they'll still probably need an artist to take that final image and make the many revisions and improvements that will inevitably be needed. The amount of time, effort, and paid employees it would take to use these generators for the jobs that human artists are currently doing would likely end up having the same, if not more, costs as continuing to employ these human artists. So I don't think they'll do it. And if they do, as I said, they're still going to need to pay artists and programmers to make it happen. So those jobs aren't going to go away, they're just going to evolve and change with the addition of this tool, just like they have with the addition of every other tool the art community has seen introduced. Finally, number 5, the fear that it blurs the line between what is a tool for artists to use and what is a replacement for artists' hard work. Like I said before, this is something that comes down to the same argument that we've seen digital artists face time and time again. That the tools that they have at their disposal make the work that they make with them less valid or valuable. I am personally of the belief that so long as an artist is transparent about how they made a piece, that piece is no less artistically authentic or valid. But I know this is going to be a very controversial topic in the future as more artists start using AI-generated art in their work. And I know there are going to be a plethora of other differing opinions on that. And I get it, I understand why, and I'm not trying to say people are wrong for having other opinions on whether or not artists should be using AI-generated art in their own art. I just don't agree. Nonetheless, I understand the fear, and I'm actually quite interested in seeing how people respond to this as it becomes more normalized and acceptable within the community. I'd also be really interested to hear what you guys think about this specifically in the comments, because I feel like you guys would have a lot of diverse opinions and insights into the matter. Anyway, on page 10 of this goddamn script, we're finally at the conclusion. And I gotta say, while I went into the research for this topic with a lot of fears surrounding AI art as a whole, I feel a lot better about it now. I still absolutely have some anxieties about it, and more specifically about how it will evolve and how humans will abuse it dishonestly, but I think that's natural when faced with a brand new thing that we can't fully understand the ramifications of yet. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I went into this seeing AI art as something to fear and worry about, and I'm leaving it seeing it as a promising new tool for artists and a fascinating new medium in and of itself, and I'm pleasantly surprised and honestly really happy about that. I don't think AI art is going to be replacing artists anytime soon, and if that's something you're worried about, I would strongly encourage you to look into the matter more yourselves, because I think you'll find that it's not nearly as radical, and I mean by definition, like pertaining to an extreme change or overhaul, not like tubular and rad, as sensationalized media would have you believe. I think if there's anything to fear about AI art, in my opinion, it's actually, ironically, the human element. What ill-intentioned human assholes are gonna do with it is likely the biggest problem that we'll face the soonest. Anyway, that's all from me, finally. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please leave a like and subscribe if you did, and thank you for watching. Special thank you as always to channel members Cafe Soleil, Joseph Solomon, Unknown Code, and Abyss Reborn, as well as patrons Batman, Kyle Lowe, Blue Swanson, This Is Totally My Name, Unity, Cora Fear, and Jamisha Walker for their support. And I'll see you in my next one. Hey guys, it's Celestia, and today we're talking about Webtoon again. More specifically, a comic hosted there. A lot of people commented on last week's video about Webtoon asking me to discuss boyfriends. Probably because, as far as the topic of Webtoon's questionable choice in advertising goes, it's hard not to think of boyfriends. I hadn't actually seen any of those ads before this was brought up in the comments, and quite frankly, I wish I still hadn't. It was a simpler time back then. But while the ads are so cringy and obnoxious that I'd rather watch Riverdale from start to finish than see one more second of them, they're not the actual source of the controversy surrounding the comic. They're just the gateway that got me down the rabbit hole that is the boyfriend's controversy. So as many of you requested, I'm gonna talk about it. Because after seeing those comments, I went from being blissfully unaware of boyfriends altogether to having spent a full day doing nothing but researching it and reading 60 fucking chapters of it. And I can see why this whole drama happened. And why it's a lot more nuanced than it appears to be at first glance. And it is nuanced, significantly more so than the hordes of Twitter users screaming, "If you so much as glance at the boyfriend's comic, you're garbage, do not interact," would have you believe. I'll do my best to explain that nuance before drawing my conclusions by separating the whole issue into 3 parts, because honestly, parts aside, it's 3 separate issues. The art, the artist, and the ads. Before I do though, let me just add a small disclaimer. A lot of the controversy around this has to do with the type of representation that this comic gives gay men. And I think it goes without saying that I am not a gay man. I do not speak on behalf of gay men as if I'm any authority on what is or isn't harmful to them, and I certainly don't want to come across that way. I did reach out on Twitter to the community for some wider insights, and I did receive some self-identified gay users, because I wanted their insight and voices to be taken into consideration during my research. What I can say for myself, though, is that I am a lesbian, and I thoroughly understand what it's like to have your sexuality commodified, fetishized, and stereotyped. And subsequently, I do understand why this has upset some gay men in the community based on that experience. I mean no disrespect with any commentary in this video, and everything I'm gonna say comes from a sympathetic and respectful place with no intention of diminishing the significance of that perspective. That in mind, let's start with part 1, the art. For anyone who is as unfamiliar with boyfriends as I was before this video, it's a slice-of-life romance comic hosted on Webtoon that focuses on 4 primary characters who, as one does in a romance comic, meet and fall in love. They originally start out in couples of 2, but the prospect of pursuing polyamory is broached very early on, at which point the 4 of them begin a polyamorous relationship. And while I've only read 62 out of almost 120 chapters, because quite frankly, I don't have anywhere near enough free time to dedicate to finishing it. It's largely just about them going on dates and developing their relationships and living the college student life after that point. And as far as the comic itself goes, it's pretty innocent, in my opinion. I mean, not like actually innocent, because sex is a topic that is brought up often, but I mean innocent as in generally well-meaning and positive. It got its fair share of smiles and chuckles out of me while reading it, even if the writing can be a little cringe sometimes. And both sexuality and polyamory seem to be approached healthily, openly, and positively, even if it is relatively lacking in the realism department, which I'll address more in a minute here. I didn't see anything openly problematic in the half of it that I read, aside from one tasteless joke about drugging people, and without any background into the situation, it comes off as fairly innocuous. And that alone is one of the problems that people have with it, that the relationships depicted are shallow, boring, stereotypical, idealized, and infantilized. In terms of infantilization, what people generally mean by this is that the relationships involved are very like uwu kissy, bundle you in blankets and make you hot chocolate, which some feel makes it come off as if the comic is depicting gay relationships as, well, exactly like that. To many, that feels condescending. It's kind of like the Elliot Page situation. When Elliot wore a suit and corsage to the Met Gala and people instantly started saying shit like, "Oh, he looks so polite with his little flower," or "Oh, he's the handsomest little boy." It seemed supportive on the surface, and I have no doubt that it is well-meaning and was supposed to be supportive, but that's a 34-year-old man. And saying shit like that about him that you wouldn't say about a man that isn't trans is reinforcing the idea that trans men aren't men. In this case, the concerns of infantilizing gay men in boyfriends arise from something similar. That depicting homosexual relationships this way is reinforcing that they're not like heterosexual relationships. And while I understand why people feel this way, I don't think that's entirely fair. I think it's missing the context. And the context here is that it's a romance comic. Romance manga, or Nora Roberts novels, comparatively, use a lot of the exact same uwu cutesy tropes in their stories, whether the relationship is heterosexual or not. The point is to appeal to people who want that uwu cutesy shit, and in order to deliver that shit, realism is naturally sacrificed. So yes, it's shallow and simple and idealized and surface level, head over heels love that is nothing nothing like a real relationship, because generally speaking, this kind of media isn't targeting an audience that wants to read about a realistic relationship. It's targeting people who want some light reading that makes them smile or aww over it and then move on. I understand that a lot of people are looking at this as a separate issue, that gay men already don't have enough representation in media, and that therefore creators making that representation have an obligation to do so realistically and accurately, because they already have to deal with enough people seeing them as the stereotypes that media so frequently represents them as. But I just don't personally believe that criticizing boyfriends for that is reasonable, because I don't think it would depict a straight relationship any differently. It's a light, slice-of-life romance comic, and those kinds of comics are going to be cutesy and unrealistic by default, because that's the vibe that they're literally meant to capture. I'm not talking about everything in the romance genre, because obviously a lot of it has plot outside of that or is more drama-based than lighthearted, but Boyfriends falls into a very specific genre of romance literature that is not plot or drama-based, and I feel like it's being judged as if it's supposed to be this realistic, true-to-life representation of what gay and poly relationships are really like, when that's just not fair to the medium. And if we're out here saying all depictions of LGBTQ relationships have to be realistic regardless of what type of genre or medium they're actually being depicted in, we're severely limiting both the creativity of creators and the amount of representation and content we'll actually end up receiving. Because if some goofy fucking comic with a bunch of straight characters based on character tropes can only have an LGBTQ character if they're depicted realistically and accurately and free of any tropes, I mean, that defeats the purpose of that form of media, and they're just gonna choose to not have that character then. And I don't mean to say that we should encourage harmful tropes to be used. Like, if the straight characters all have endearing or interesting tropes, and then the LGBTQ characters have damaging, offensive tropes that read more as a demeaning caricature of an actual LGBTQ person, I mean, that's obviously shitty and not okay. But if every character is reduced to a funny, endearing, harmless trope because that's what is expected for that form or genre of media, which I believe to be the case with Boyfriends, I don't personally see how that's a problem. The other problem, similar to, but also the exact opposite of the infantilization, is the claim that Boyfriends fetishizes gay men by including as much sexually implicit content as it does. Basically, very early on, it's pretty blatantly and clearly established that these dudes bang all the time. And a lot of people feel like that means the creator is fetishizing MLM relationships. For clarity's sake, the definition of fetishization is that it's the act of making someone the object of sexual desire based on some aspect of their identity. And this is a huge problem that many minorities have to deal with constantly, including and especially even gay men. I understand why people are sensitive to this issue, and I don't understand on a superficial level either. Like, if I had a nickel for every time I told a guy who asked me out, "Sorry, I'm a lesbian and in a relationship," and he responded with, "Ooh, that's hot," and took it as encouragement to keep trying to get with me, I certainly wouldn't have to worry nearly as much as I am right now about making sure this video doesn't get demonetized. It's a horrible, horrible feeling to be reduced to one aspect of your identity and found attractive exclusively because of that. And gay men have fallen victim to that practice through poor representation in media for a long, long time. There was a significant period of time where the only representation gay men had in media was sexual. Straight people would get romance movies and novels that occasionally featured sex as a side plot device, and gay men would only get representation almost exclusively as no romance and only sex. That and the AIDS crisis led to a very harmful and derogatory view of gay men as dehumanized, dirty, hypersexualized, and ultimately defined them by one aspect of their sexuality rather than by their individuality as people. In time, this issue has become less prominent, but by no means has it gone away, and I completely understand why that's led people to being particularly critical of how gay men are represented in media. But Boyfriends isn't some Fujoshi BL manga or smut film made by a straight person. It's a comic that's clearly just trying to depict all aspects of a gay poly relationship, and it's created by a gay man. Again, I've only read about half of it, but from everything that I have read, it's not some smutty, over-sexualized thing. It's a romance comic that has sex in it because a lot of real relationships have have sex in them. Yes, they do it a lot, but it's by no means the only unrealistic, exaggerated aspect of the plot. They get together almost immediately, move at a ridiculous pace in their relationship, and transition into their very first polyamorous relationship with almost no bumps in the road that aren't immediately resolved. The whole thing is fast-paced and exaggerated because it has to be entertaining and keep people's attention. And the sexuality aspect seems to me like just another example of that. I've read a million comics of straight relationships depicted the same way for the same reason, and I don't personally see any evidence of the characters being fetishized and coded as attractive because they're gay. Like, I feel like a lot of people throw the word fetishization around without really understanding what it means. Drawing a gay character as sexy or being intimate with another character does not immediately mean that person is fetishizing gay men. As I said, fetishization means sexualizing a character based on one aspect of their identity, which in this case would be homosexuality. So it's only fetishization if that gay character is only depicted as sexy or in intimate situations because they're gay. If we're only supposed to find him or what he's doing attractive because he's gay, basically. But the failure to differentiate between the two is actually quite harmful because it ends up leading to the opposite problem. Any depiction of a gay character being attractive or doing the do, thanks YouTube, is called out as being fetishization, it will end up not being depicted at all. So once again, we're kind of back to the same issue as before. Like, if creators will be demonized for the gay relationships they depict being too cutesy, innocent, and unrealistic, even if that depiction is completely unrelated to the character's sexuality, they'll just choose not to depict them at all. Similarly, if creators will be demonized for the gay relationships they depict being too sexy, even if that depiction is completely unrelated to the character's sexuality, they'll choose not to depict it at all. If there's no way to incorporate LGBTQ representation that won't be over-policed, we won't get any. And in my opinion, boyfriends being accused of fetishizing gay men just by including gay men that have sex is a perfect example of that problem. It's made by a gay man and does not, in my opinion, target an audience that will view it as being appealing that way specifically because the characters are gay. But I think a lot of that also goes hand in hand with the other big issue that people have with it, that it reinforces harmful stereotypes of gay men. And I can see where this one came from, but again, it's so much more nuanced than people are willing to give it credit for being. First of all, the main four characters are literally and openly intended to be based on stereotypes. While they do all have actual names, being Adrian, Vincent, Felix, and Kevin, they are never referred to as such, and are almost exclusively referred to by the fandom as nerd, prep, goth, and jock. The comic makes no attempt to disguise the fact that all of its protagonists are specifically intended to represent certain stereotypes in a silly, harmless way. And while I understand that in some cases, these stereotypes can absolutely be seen as poor representation of gay men, like Vincent or Prep, he can often be depicted as quite flamboyant and similar to the token gay friend character trope that's so fucking infuriatingly common and harmful. And I can absolutely see how people would come to the conclusion that that's the stereotype that he's intended to represent. But I also feel like that's intentionally or unintentionally missing the point of boyfriends, which is that none of them are based on stereotypes of gay men. They're just based on general stereotypes of people. Nerd is the shy and easily flustered bookworm. Prep is the pretty boy trust fund kid with a butler that's literally named Jeeves. Goth is the edgy, sarcastic bad boy, and Jock is the, naturally, dumb jock with a heart of gold and guns for days. Yes, Prep might come across as that stereotypical gay guy sometimes, but that's because if any of the main three antagonists of Mean Girls were gay men, they would too. That's the preppy stereotype. And while none of the characters have much depth beyond their stereotypes in my opinion, Prep does have much more personality than just that, and it's clear, at least to me, after reading as much of it as I have, that he's not based on any gay stereotype, but just a preppy one, as his name would suggest. There's just overlap between the two because of the unfortunate and quite frankly shitty fact that for a long ass time, gay men in media were depicted as a trope that was very similar to preppy. But I don't think the creator had any deliberate intention to make him read as such. Ultimately, I think a lot of the criticism that Boyfriends as a comic alone is facing comes from a very well-meaning place. for the most part, but a place that appears to be disregarding the context in which it exists. As a lesbian, I'm fucking sick as hell of being represented in media exclusively as either butch and strong with short hair and masculine clothing, or soft and sweet with long hair and dresses. And I too want better representation than that. I get it. I'm also sick of being commodified and fetishized for my sexuality. I understand wanting better. We all have a right to want better. But if the tables were turned and this was a comic about 4 lesbians, I would not personally look at it as an offense to that desire for better representation, but as something separate entirely. Because as I said, Boyfriends is clearly not out here trying to be a realistic depiction of anything. Homosexuality, polyamory, individuality, or even society. It's supposed to be exaggerated and idealized because that's the genre. So saying it's bad or harmful representation of gay men when it's not even supposed to be realistic representation of anything just seems unfair. Understandable, obviously, but unfair. If homosexuality was not part of this comic, no one would have these issues with it, at least not to this degree. So to hold it to a higher standard just because it is about gay characters feels to me like it's just setting it up for failure. It's not good representation of realistic gay characters, I agree, but that's because it's not good representation of life. And as a funny, silly little romance comic, it shouldn't have to be, so long as the lack of realism isn't deliberately reinforcing any actual harmful stereotypes. And in my opinion, I personally don't think that Boyfriends is doing that. But 5 pages of scripting in and we're still only now finishing up discussing the art itself. Part 2, the artist, is a topic that I found to be much more contentious and controversial. So now that we're done talking about why people are mad at the Boyfriends comic, let's talk about why they're mad at the person who made it. Refrainbow, or Ray for short, is the creator of Boyfriends.